Who are you? A simple question, but not a very simple answer. We all, to some degree or another, identify with what we do as to who we are. A dental hygienist, a college professor, a grade school teacher, a police officer. What is it about those titles that we hold? And if who we are, we identify with what we do, what happens then when we change titles or we change careers? Is there a fundamental shift that takes place? As part of my identity, I'm a retired New York City detective. I spent 20 years in a very satisfying and successful career. I was a witness to some of the most historic events in New York City's history. In fact, the history of our country, and I'm very proud of that. I certainly identified with the title of detective. If people asked me throughout my career, who are you? I would simply say, I'm a detective. It seemed like a logical explanation. Everybody understands what a detective does, and that's who I felt that I was. Now, I may be a little bit biased in my opinion that the NYPD is on the cutting edge of modern law enforcement, crime fighting, and counterterrorism. When I conducted investigations, I did so with all the modern technology at my fingertips. More often than not, I was very quickly able to identify a perpetrator, gather evidence, and make an arrest, all due to the modern technology that I had. Most of the time, I was able to contact that perpetrator on the phone and call them up and convince them that I knew everything that there was to know about them. I knew where they lived, I knew where they worked, I knew what car they drove, I knew what hours they kept, I knew where they hung out. I knew the name of their girlfriend. I even knew the name of the girlfriend that nobody else knew about. And after I got off the phone with them, they realized they had precious little time. I convinced them that going on the lam or trying to avoid me was a futile attempt. All of this was due to the 21st century technology that I had at my fingertips. When I decided to retire, I thought, great, this is an opportunity for me to reinvent myself, to do something entirely different. During my research, I found an opportunity to work overseas. There was a program that the military had that embedded former law enforcement investigators on the front lines of Afghanistan and Iraq. All I saw was the title, Experienced Investigator, and I thought, that's me, I can do that. Not truly knowing what the core strengths were, wherein rested my identity. I didn't fully understand the alignment between who I was, what I did, or even why. Well, I was really excited to give my 2 weeks notice to my company. And in a couple of weeks, I found myself overseas and in Afghanistan. What these investigators were doing was to investigate counterinsurgency and the IED networks. Well, that was the biggest threat to our soldiers. When I met the company manager in Afghanistan, he said to me, where do you want to go? What part of the country do you want to work in? And I said, it didn't really matter, wherever I'm needed. So he sent me to eastern Afghanistan, one of the worst fighting against the Taliban that was taking place at that time. My new title was that of a law enforcement professional. I was flown by helicopter to a remote forward operating base, a base that sat at the footprint of the Tora Bora Mountains, the same mountains that Osama bin Laden escaped to into Pakistan. And I thought to myself, I'm a 21st century investigator in a 21st century world. With all of this experience, there's no doubt I'm going to catch Osama bin Laden. Now, this base that we worked out of was a 14th century mud compound with no modern conveniences. The only modern conveniences that were there was what the military hardware, it was the military that brought hardware with them. When I got off the helicopter, I was led to believe that the military needed my services, and I was expecting to be greeted with open arms and smiles. And when I got off the helicopter, I met a young captain who was the commanding officer of the unit, and I said, hi, my name is Ken Silvia. I'm your law enforcement professional. And he said, looked at me with a real puzzled look, and he said, what is that, and what do you do? Obviously, he didn't get the memo. Now, so he asked me, what do you do? And with all of my experience and the briefings I had and the understanding of the program, I was at a loss for words. How does a 21st century investigator apply modern law enforcement techniques to the front lines of a war zone? And this country that I was in was still living in the 14th century. This is 14th century policing. There's no databases, there's no driver's licenses, there's no birth certificates, there's no mug shots. Most Afghans guess their age. They're not even sure. There's no deeds to property. After all, the houses are made out of mud and they're built by the owner. There's no street signs. My thought of catching Osama bin Laden was quickly fading. We were up against an insurgency that understood the landscape much better than we did. They knew the caves, the goat trails, the riverbeds, the mountains and valleys like the back of their hand. How was I going to investigate and identify the IED makers, the bomb makers, the implanters, the high-value targets that I was set out to do? Fear suddenly gripped me. I was going to fail in my mission to help our troops. I was going to fail in my mission to help advance the war. I had to really dig deep and try to understand who I was, what it was that I did. Again, I found myself completely out of my element. So I had to think about what were the factors that led me into law enforcement to begin with. What are the successful inner core strengths that I had that brought me to this moment? What was it about police work that drew me to it like a moth to a flame? Well, what I found really surprised me. The answer lied in my core strengths, strengths that came naturally and others that I honed through experience and training. Core strengths that have been silently guiding me throughout my whole life, not a title. A title is something you put on a business card. A title is something you put on a nameplate for a desk. What made me a successful detective was my ability to gain trust from others. I was a negotiator. I was the guy who stuck up for the guy who was bullied and who couldn't protect himself. I was a guardian, a confidant, a manager of information, a puzzle solver. I think in linear logic. Those are the things that made me successful in my career. The technology helped, but technology can only go so far. Afghanistan, as you can see, is quite different than the Western world, or even the United States. Most Afghans live somewhere in the mid-40s. 70% of the population is illiterate. The average Afghan makes about $800 to $1,000 a year. So, after digging deep and thinking about all the things that made me successful, I applied those principles and actually was able to advance the war and help protect our soldiers. What I want to leave you with today is don't be bound by a title. It's too restrictive. If you go through life and you change careers and you change titles, you are the same person. Look to your inner strengths. What makes you drawn to your profession? What draws you to your passion? It's those things that define who you are, and with that knowledge, you can do anything you want, anywhere you want. And by the way, I never caught Osama bin Laden. The Navy SEALs beat me to it. Thank you.